Welcome back to our channel, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from today. This story of dignity, respect, and quiet strength will leave you speechless. On a crisp autumn evening in Columbus, Ohio, the prestigious Wellington Club stood adorned with crystal chandeliers and elegant floral arrangements for its annual charity gala. The city's most influential figures gathered in their finest attire, but none could have predicted how the events of that night would unfold, particularly for Usha Vance, whose presence would challenge every assumption made about power and privilege. The marble steps leading to the entrance gleamed under the soft glow of vintage lampposts, where Victoria Mendoza, the newly appointed gala chairwoman, stood greeting guests with practiced charm. Her emerald evening gown caught the light as she welcomed each arrival with calculated warmth, her clipboard held close like a shield of authority. When Usha Vance approached the entrance, her simple yet elegant navy blue dress contrasting with the extravagant gowns around her, Victoria's welcoming smile faltered. "I'm sorry," she said, examining her list with exaggerated care, "but I don't see your name here. This is a private event." The growing line of guests behind Usha began to shift uncomfortably. Among them, Michael Crawford and his wife, Lauren Stevens, exchanged knowing glances. They had witnessed similar scenes before at these exclusive gatherings, where assumptions often masked deeper prejudices. "There must be some mistake," Usha replied calmly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated such situations before. "I received an invitation last month." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different event? The Wellington Club Gala is our most exclusive annual gathering." Her voice carried a hint of condescension that made several onlookers wince. Behind Victoria, Gregory Ward, a senior board member, emerged from the entrance, his attention caught by the growing tension. He observed the scene with interest, though he made no immediate move to intervene. "I can assure you," Usha continued, maintaining her composure, "that I have the proper invitation." She reached into her clutch to retrieve the embossed card, but Victoria had already turned to address another guest. "Thomas Gutierrez," Victoria called out, beckoning to a well-known real estate developer standing behind Usha. "Please come right through. We've been expecting you." As Thomas moved to pass, he paused briefly beside Usha, recognition flickering across his face. But before he could speak, Victoria's assistant, Brittany Wilson, stepped forward with another clipboard. "Ms. Mendoza," Brittany whispered, urgency in her tone. "Perhaps we should." "Not now," Victoria cut her off, continuing to usher other guests past Usha, who remained standing with dignified patience. The murmurs among the waiting guests grew louder. Patricia Gordon, a longtime philanthropist, watched the scene unfold with increasing discomfort. She had attended enough of these events to recognize when someone was making a grave mistake. Douglas Mitchell, chairman of the city's largest charitable foundation, emerged from his car just then, taking in the situation with a practiced eye. He noticed Usha immediately, and his expression shifted from surprise to something approaching alarm. "Victoria," he called out, making his way forward. But his voice was lost in the growing commotion as more guests arrived. Jennifer Henderson, a prominent news anchor, had also joined the queue, her journalist's instincts picking up on the brewing story. She observed how Usha maintained her dignity despite the clear dismissal, noting every detail with professional interest. "The guest list is quite clear," Victoria announced loudly, as if addressing the entire crowd. "We simply cannot accommodate unexpected arrivals, no matter how persistent they might be." The statement hung in the air like frost, causing several guests to shift uncomfortably. Kimberly Evans, known for her work in civil rights law, stepped forward from the line, her expression determined. "This is completely unacceptable," Kimberly began, but Usha raised a hand slightly, silencing the protest with gentle authority. At that moment, Robert Manning, the club's executive director, burst through the doors, his face flushed with concern. He had just received an urgent message from his assistant about the situation unfolding on his front steps. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the entrance. "A word, please." Immediately. Victoria turned, her confident smile wavering slightly at his tone. "Robert, I'm simply maintaining our standards as discussed. This person doesn't appear on the list, Anne." "That person," Robert interrupted, his voice tight with controlled anxiety, "is Usha Vance, our keynote speaker for the evening and the chairwoman of the National Education Foundation. She's also the one who approved the $1 million grant for our youth literacy program last month." The silence that fell was absolute. Victoria's clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp as the color drained from her face. Around them, the assembled guests seemed to hold their collective breath. Usha stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her expression serene. When she finally spoke, her voice carried clearly but kindly through the stunned silence. "Perhaps now would be a good time to check that list again, Ms. Mendoza?" The growing crowd witnessed something remarkable then. Instead of showing anger or pressing her advantage, Usha simply waited with patient dignity as Victoria fumbled through her papers, her hands trembling slightly. I have it here," Victoria stammered, producing a different list. "Mrs. Vance, there seems to have been a terrible mistake. You're listed on our VIP registry. I deeply apologize for the confusion." Robert stepped forward, mortification evident on his face. "Mrs. Vance, please accept our most sincere apologies. This is completely unacceptable, and I assure you—" "There's no need for further apology," Usha interrupted gently. "What matters is how we move forward from here. Shall we discuss the evening's agenda? I believe we have some important initiatives to address." The gathered crowd watched in amazement as Usha graciously accepted Robert's arm and ascended the steps, pausing only briefly to give Victoria a gentle smile that contained neither blame nor resentment. As they disappeared into the building, the remaining guests began to move forward again, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Jennifer Henderson was already making notes on her phone, while Kimberly Evans engaged in intense whispered conversations with those around her. That evening, as Usha delivered her keynote address about educational equality and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, her earlier experience at the entrance went unmentioned. But her words carried extra weight, touching hearts and opening minds throughout the assembly. Later, during the dinner service, Victoria approached Usha's table, her earlier confidence replaced by genuine remorse. "Mrs. Vance," she began, "I wanted to apologize again for my behavior earlier. I made terrible assumptions and I was wrong." Usha gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please, join me for a moment, Ms. Mendoza. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we might make these events more inclusive in the future." The rest of the evening became a masterclass in grace and leadership, as Usha transformed what could have been a moment of division into an opportunity for growth and understanding. She demonstrated that true power lies not in the ability to exclude others, but in the wisdom to build bridges where walls once stood. As the story spread through social media and local news in the following days, it wasn't the initial confrontation that people remembered most. Instead, they spoke of how one woman's dignity and compassion turned a moment of prejudice into a catalyst for change. Have you ever witnessed someone handle discrimination with such grace? Share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content that reminds us of the power of dignity and understanding. Remember, true class isn't about who you keep out, it's about how you lift others up. Like and share this video if you believe in the power of grace under pressure, and ring that bell to join our notification squad for more stories that matter. The morning after the Wellington Club Gala, the city buzzed with whispers of what had transpired. But while many focused on Victoria Mendoza's faux pas, they missed the deeper currents of change that Usha Vance had set in motion. Dawn broke over the city skyline as Michelle Edwards, a junior reporter at the local newspaper, sat at her desk reviewing the footage that had surfaced from the previous night. Her editor, Christopher Curtis, had already received dozens of calls from people who had witnessed the incident, each eager to share their perspective on how Usha Vance had transformed a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for growth. In the corporate offices of the Wellington Club, Robert Manning faced a crisis meeting with the board of directors. Elizabeth Sullivan, the club's longest-serving board member, spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of experience. "This isn't just about bad publicity," Elizabeth stated, studying the faces around the mahogany conference table. "This is about who we are as an institution and what we represent in this community." It wasn't just what she did, Thomas Gutierrez explained during his interview, it was how she did it. There was no anger, no desire for revenge. She showed us all a better way forward. Back at the Wellington Club, Victoria finally gathered the courage to do what she knew she needed to. With hands trembling slightly, she dialed Usha's office number, half expecting to be refused an audience. Instead, Rachel Anderson put her through immediately. "Mrs. Vance," Victoria began, her voice unsteady, "I was hoping we could meet. Not for the press, not for show, but because I need to understand how to be better." Usha's response was immediate and characteristic of her approach to life. "Come to my office this afternoon. We'll have tea and talk about creating change that matters." That afternoon, as Victoria entered the National Education Foundation's offices, she found herself in an environment that challenged everything she thought she knew about power and influence. The walls were covered not with expensive artwork, but with children's drawings and thank you letters from community programs. Usha greeted her warmly, as if the previous night's events had never happened. "I believe," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair, "that every challenge presents an opportunity for transformation." Over the next 2 hours, they discussed not just the incident, but the systemic issues it represented. Victoria found herself sharing stories from her own life, revealing the insecurities that had driven her need to be the perfect gatekeeper. "I've spent so much time keeping people out," Victoria admitted, "that I forgot what it means to welcome people in." As they talked, Michael Crawford, who served on both the Wellington Club's board and the National Education Foundation's advisory committee, arrived for a scheduled meeting. Seeing Victoria there, he paused, but Usha immediately invited him to join them. "We're discussing ways to make our institutions more inclusive," Usha explained. "Your perspective would be valuable." What followed was a remarkable conversation about privilege, responsibility, and the power of institutional change. Michael shared his own experiences with exclusion in elite circles, despite his success, while Victoria spoke honestly about her fears of losing status and influence. "The interesting thing about influence," Usha observed, "is that it grows when we share it. Real power isn't about keeping others down, it's about lifting them up." As the afternoon light began to fade, their discussion had evolved into concrete plans for change. Victoria, transformed by the conversation, proposed a complete overhaul of the Wellington Club's membership and event policies. Michael offered to chair a new diversity and inclusion committee. Meanwhile, across the city, the story continued to resonate. Patricia Gordon, inspired by the events, announced a new scholarship program for underprivileged students. Douglas Mitchell's foundation pledged to review its own practices and policies. The local university's sociology department, led by Dr. Angela Howard, began developing a case study about the incident and its aftermath, examining how one person's dignity in the face of discrimination could catalyze institutional change. By evening, when Usha finally prepared to leave her office, Rachel handed her one last message. It was from a young girl named Lisa Martinez, a student in one of their literacy programs. "Dear Mrs. Vance, my teacher told us what happened to you. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be angry to be strong." That message, more than all the media attention and public acclaim, brought a smile to Usha's face. She understood that the real impact of the previous night's events wouldn't be measured in news coverage or policy changes, but in the hearts and minds of people who saw that grace and dignity could be more powerful than confrontation and conflict. As she drove home that evening, Usha reflected on how a moment of potential humiliation had transformed into a movement for change. Her phone buzzed with a message from Robert Manning. The Wellington Club board had unanimously voted to establish a community outreach program in her honor. But perhaps the most significant change was happening in less visible ways, in quiet conversations and personal reflections across the city. People like Victoria Mendoza were beginning to question their own assumptions and biases, while others found the courage to speak up against exclusion and discrimination. The story could have ended at the Wellington Club's steps the previous night, with anger and recrimination. Instead, it had become a catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is not protest but patience, not confrontation but compassion. In the days that followed, as the story continued to spread, people would ask Usha how she had maintained her composure in the face of such treatment. Her answer remained consistent. When we respond to difficulty with dignity, we don't just change the moment, we change the future. Have you ever seen how one person's grace can transform a negative situation? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content that reminds us of the power of dignity in the face of discrimination. A week after the Wellington Club incident, the true scope of change began to emerge in ways that no one, not even Usha Vance, could have predicted. What had started as a moment of discrimination had sparked a movement that was reshaping the city's social landscape. Early Monday morning, Benjamin Fletcher, CEO of the city's largest corporate foundation, called an unprecedented meeting of the city's philanthropic leaders. The elegant conference room at the Maxwell Building filled with faces both familiar and new, a deliberate departure from the usual exclusive guest list. "We're here today," Benjamin began, "because one woman's dignity showed us everything that was wrong with our approach to community leadership." He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, reserved for Usha Vance, who had respectfully declined to attend, suggesting instead that they invite community organizers from underserved neighborhoods. Among those present was Amanda Wright, a grassroots education advocate who had never before been invited to such gatherings. She sat beside Victoria Mendoza, whose transformation over the past week had surprised everyone, including herself. "The barriers we created," Victoria addressed the group, her voice carrying new humility, "weren't just keeping people out, they were keeping us from growing, from understanding, from truly serving our community." Across town at the National Education Foundation offices, Usha was focused on turning momentum into meaningful action. She sat with Catherine Turner, a veteran teacher from the city's struggling East Side, listening intently to stories about students who had never dared to dream of entering spaces like the Wellington Club. "What these children need," Catherine explained, her hands clasped earnestly, "isn't just education, it's the belief that they belong everywhere." The meeting was interrupted by Rachel Anderson, bringing news that would further amplify the impact of recent events. Jennifer Henderson's national news feature about the Wellington Club incident had caught the attention of Congress. An oversight committee was now examining discriminatory practices in institutions receiving federal funding. "They're requesting your testimony," Rachel informed Usha, who received the news with characteristic thoughtfulness. "This isn't about me," Usha responded. "This is about systemic change. Get me a meeting with Douglas Mitchell and Elizabeth Sullivan. We need to ensure this leads to genuine transformation, not just temporary outrage." Meanwhile, at the Wellington Club, Robert Manning was overseeing the most significant changes in the club's century-long history. The membership committee, now co-chaired by Kimberly Evans and Thomas Gutierrez, was completely restructuring admission policies. "The question isn't who we keep out anymore," Thomas explained during a heated debate, "but how we make everyone feel truly welcome." The transformation wasn't without its resistance. Charles Hawkins, a longtime club member, voiced concerns about maintaining standards. But when Michael Crawford stood to respond, his words silenced the opposition. "I've been a member here for 20 years, Michael stated, "and I've never felt more proud of this institution than when we finally admitted we needed to change." The ripple effects continued to spread through the city's social fabric. Patricia Gordon, working with Victoria Mendoza, launched a mentorship program pairing established community leaders with young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. Lauren Stevens, whose social media post had helped catalyze the movement, found herself working alongside Brittany Wilson to organize a citywide symposium on inclusive leadership. The event would feature speakers from all walks of life, sharing experiences of overcoming barriers and creating change. At the city's largest law firm, Gregory Ward initiated a pro bono program specifically focused on cases of institutional discrimination. "Sometimes," he noted during the press announcement, "it takes one moment of clarity to show us what we should have been doing all along." The transformation was perhaps most visible in Victoria Mendoza herself. She had thrown herself into the work of change with the same energy she had once devoted to exclusion. Working closely with Amanda Wright, she began visiting schools in underserved neighborhoods, listening to students' stories and dreams. "I used to think power meant controlling who got in," Victoria confided to Amanda during one such visit. Now I understand that real power lies in opening doors for others. The local university's sociology department, under Dr. Angela Howard's leadership, had begun documenting these changes. They called it the Vance effect, how one person's dignified response to discrimination could catalyze institutional transformation. As these changes unfolded, Usha maintained her focus on the foundational work of education and community building. When asked about her role in sparking this movement, she consistently redirected attention to the broader issues and the people working for change. One morning, as she prepared for another day of meetings and initiatives, Usha received an unexpected visitor. Lisa Martinez, the young student who had written to her, arrived with her mother, Maria Martinez, and her teacher, James Foster. "We've been studying about changemakers in class," Lisa explained, clutching a carefully prepared presentation. "I wrote about you, Mrs. Vance, but not just about what happened at the... I wrote about what happened after, how you showed us that changing things doesn't always mean fighting." The presentation brought tears to many eyes in the office, but it also reinforced the importance of the work being done. This wasn't just about changing policies or practices, it was about changing how the next generation understood power, dignity, and belonging. Later that day, during a meeting with Christopher Curtis and Michelle Edwards from the local newspaper, Usha emphasized this point. "The story isn't about that night at the Wellington Club," she explained. "It's about what happens when we choose to transform moments of exclusion into opportunities for inclusion." The journalists listened intently as she outlined the concrete changes taking place: the Wellington Club's new community engagement initiatives, the corporate foundation's revised grant-making processes, the mentorship programs, and the educational outreach efforts. But perhaps the most significant changes were the less visible ones. People like Ronald Walker, a security guard at the Maxwell Building, noticed how differently he was treated by the executives who passed through his lobby. "It's like they finally see me," he commented during his interview with Michelle Edwards. The transformation extended to unexpected places. Alexander Martin, owner of several exclusive restaurants in the city, approached Usha with a proposal to create apprenticeship programs for aspiring chefs from underserved communities. "We've been part of the problem," he admitted. "It's time we became part of the solution." Even the city's social calendar was changing. The upcoming autumn gala season would look very different, with events focusing on community inclusion rather than exclusivity. Victoria Mendoza, working with Patricia Gordon, was redesigning these gatherings to celebrate diversity and connection rather than status and separation. As the week drew to a close, Usha received another message that demonstrated the far-reaching impact of recent events. Stephen Phillips, chairman of the National Association of Private Clubs, requested her input on developing new guidelines for membership policies and community engagement. "Your handling of the Wellington Club incident," his letter read, "has shown us a better way forward. We don't want to just avoid discrimination, we want to actively create belonging." In her office that evening, Usha reflected on how a moment of potential humiliation had transformed into a movement for lasting change. Rachel brought in one final document for her review, the draft of a new initiative that would create pathways for underrepresented students to access leadership opportunities in major institutions. "This is how real change happens," Usha observed to Rachel. "Not through confrontation or shame, but through persistent, purposeful action that transforms barriers into bridges." The sun was setting over the city skyline as Usha prepared to leave for the day. From her window, she could see the Wellington Club in the distance, its facade unchanged but its essence transformed. The city itself felt different now, as if awakening to new possibilities of what community could mean. Have you witnessed a moment of discrimination become a catalyst for positive change? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the power of dignity and transformation in the face of adversity. 1 month after the Wellington Club incident, as autumn painted the city in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, the true legacy of Usha Vance's dignified response began to crystallize in ways that would reshape the community for generations to come. The morning dawned clear and bright as Elizabeth Meyer, a prominent city council member, stood before a packed chamber to propose the Dignity in Access Initiative, a comprehensive policy framework inspired by recent events. The gallery was filled with faces that had never before been seen in these chambers, including students from the city's underserved neighborhoods. What we witnessed last month, Elizabeth began, her voice steady and clear, wasn't just about one incident or one institution. It was about who we are as a community and who we aspire to become. Among those present was Victoria Mendoza, seated beside Amanda Wright and Lisa Martinez, the young student whose essay about Usha had now become part of the city's school curriculum. Victoria's own transformation had become a powerful testament to the possibility of change. Robert Manning, representing the Wellington Club, stood to address the council. Our institution's history spans over a century, he acknowledged, but our most important chapter is the one we're writing now. He proceeded to outline the club's new Community Bridge program, which would open its doors and resources to diverse groups throughout the city. Meanwhile, across town at the National Education Foundation, Usha was meeting with Catherine Turner and James Foster to review the impact of their expanded literacy initiative. The program had seen unprecedented growth, fueled by new partnerships with institutions that had previously remained isolated from community engagement. The numbers tell one story, Catherine observed, spreading charts across the conference table. But the real impact is in the changed attitudes we're seeing, both from our students and from our partners. Rachel Anderson interrupted the meeting with urgent news. The Congressional Committee's investigation into discriminatory practices had led to proposed legislation that would require all federally funded institutions to implement comprehensive inclusion protocols. They're calling it the Vance standard, Rachel explained, showing Usha the preliminary draft. Usha's response was characteristic. Let's ensure this focuses on creating opportunity, not just preventing discrimination. Get me a meeting with Douglas Mitchell and Kimberly Evans. We need to make sure this legislation builds bridges, not just removes barriers. The transformation of the city's social landscape continued to unfold in both dramatic and subtle ways. Benjamin Fletcher's corporate foundation had completely restructured its grant-making process, with Michael Crawford leading a new committee that prioritized community impact over institutional prestige. We're not just changing who gets the money, Michael explained during a press conference with Jennifer Henderson. We're changing how we define success and impact in our community. Thomas Gutierrez, working with Gregory Ward, had launched an innovative real estate development program that ensured new luxury projects included genuine community integration components. Excellence and exclusivity are not the same thing, Thomas noted. We finally learned the difference. At the local university, Dr. Angela Howard's research on the Vance effect had evolved into a comprehensive study of institutional transformation. Her team documented how Usha's response to discrimination had created a template for turning confrontation into collaboration. The Wellington Club itself had become an unexpected center for community transformation. Under Victoria Mendoza's leadership, the club now hosted regular community forums where people from all walks of life could share their experiences and perspectives. During one such forum, Charles Hawkins, who had initially resisted the changes, stood to share his own journey of understanding. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I thought we were protecting something valuable by keeping others out. Instead, we were diminishing ourselves. Patricia Gordon and Lauren Stevens had expanded their mentorship program into a citywide network that connected established leaders with emerging voices from underrepresented communities. The program, named Bridges of Dignity, had already facilitated hundreds of meaningful partnerships. One afternoon, as Usha reviewed the program's progress with Patricia, they were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Alexander Martin, the restaurant owner, arrived with his new apprentice chef, Maria Ramirez, a graduate of the city's technical college who had never imagined entering such spaces before. Mrs. Vance, Maria said, her voice steady despite her nervousness, your story showed me that I belong anywhere my talents can take me. Now I'm helping others believe the same thing. The ripple effects continued to spread beyond the city limits. Stephen Phillips reported that private clubs across the country were adopting what they called the Wellington model of community engagement. The transformation that had begun with one woman's dignity was reshaping institutions nationwide. Brittany Wilson, who had tried to warn Victoria on that fateful night, had found her own voice as an advocate for institutional change. Working with Christopher Curtis at the local newspaper, she now wrote a regular column about community transformation and inclusive leadership. Even the city's physical landscape was beginning to reflect the change in social dynamics. Ronald Walker, the security guard whose perspective had touched many, had been promoted to head of community relations at the Maxwell Building. The lobby where he had once stood guard now hosted regular community art exhibitions and cultural events. The autumn gala season, now in full swing, bore little resemblance to its former self. Under the joint leadership of Victoria Mendoza and Amanda Wright, these events had been reimagined as celebrations of community achievement and connection. At one such event, held at the Wellington Club, Lisa Martinez and her classmates presented their projects about community changemakers. The audience, a diverse gathering that would have been unimaginable just months before, listened intently as young voices shared their visions for the future. The most powerful thing Mrs. Vance taught us, Lisa concluded her presentation, is that you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the strongest response is simply standing in your truth with dignity. The evening culminated with an unexpected announcement. Elizabeth Sullivan, speaking on behalf of a coalition of city institutions, revealed the creation of the Vance Fellowship for Community Leadership. The program would provide resources and support for individuals working to transform their communities through dignity and dialogue. As Usha took the podium to acknowledge the honor, she redirected attention to the broader movement for change. What we're celebrating tonight isn't about one person or one moment, she explained. It's about what happens when we choose to see challenges as opportunities for transformation. She gestured to Victoria Mendoza, who joined her at the podium. The two women, once on opposite sides of an exclusionary barrier, now stood together as partners in change. Their embrace symbolized everything the community had learned about the power of dignity to transform conflict into connection. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Jennifer Henderson conducted one final interview with Usha for her national news feature. Looking back, she asked, "What would you say to the person you were that night on the steps?" Usha's response captured the essence of everything that had unfolded. "I would say what I hope we all now understand, that true power isn't in keeping people out, but in bringing people together. And that dignity, when maintained in the face of discrimination, has the power to transform not just moments, but movements." As she left the club that night, Usha paused on those same steps where everything had begun. The city spread out before her, changed not by confrontation or conflict, but by the quiet power of dignity and the persistent work of transformation. The security guard holding the door was new, a young man named David Thompson, who had come through the Community Bridge program. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," he said softly. "Not just for what you did, but for showing us all what we can become." Has someone's dignity in the face of discrimination inspired you to create change in your community? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that reminds us of our power to transform our world through grace and understanding.